Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Aspiring Entrepreneurs Business Planning Night. Tonight we have Andrew Baxter. Billy is the nickname, and Billy would like to take you through how to prepare your business plan. Billy is one of a very senior person, being the CEO for a couple of ad agencies like Ogilvy and Publicis, and sits as a board of director for Australia Pork Limited, Oz Harvest, Sydney Symphony Orchestra, etc. So I would like to hand it over to you, Billy, and take it on.
Thank you, and very nice to meet you all virtually. And I think what I'll do is, since I've left the corporate world as a CEO 4 years ago, I've set up a bit of a company around business planning. And I was just saying to Kumar before that I think I've now helped 88 companies in the last 18 months write their business plans, from startups all the way through to $500 million companies. So, which has been fantastic. So, let me go through a little bit of a presentation. If people have got questions throughout, just jump in and certainly ask them. But otherwise, we'll have plenty of time at the end. There's about 35, 40 minutes of me of content that I've prepared to present to you. But I don't mind. If you want to ask a question, I'm happy to stop and jump in. Otherwise, we can certainly ask questions at the end. So let me just share my screen. Everybody see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So interestingly, in Australia, and I don't think this would be any different anywhere in the world, but 4 in 5 businesses do not have a plan. So if you don't quite have one, and obviously a big part of sitting through these, what opportunities Australia put together for you is actually to get to a plan and a pitch and all those sorts of things. But don't feel too concerned, because 4 out of 5 companies don't have a plan. However, if you do have a plan, you've got 48% better chance of growing your company. And interestingly, those companies that are deemed as fast-growing companies, and that's companies that grow at 90% or more a year. So you think of the fastest-growing companies you can think about. You would actually think, because they're growing so fast, they probably don't have a plan. They're just off and running. Well, funnily enough, 71% of them do have a plan. So there's a whole lot of statistics to say that even having a very simple plan helps you succeed. Interestingly, of the companies that did do a plan in that study, so of the 20% that did do a plan, the 1 in 5, 76% said their business would be where they thought it would be after doing their plan. So I talk a lot about planning being about visualizing success. And if any of you have been involved in sports or the arts, you see often many of the athletes, they close their eyes, or even before a major performance, you'll see a singer, closing their eyes and taking a few deep breaths. And they're actually visualizing doing the perfect performance or the perfect jump in athletics or whatever it might be. And many years ago, there was a French study done that showed that long jumpers, like the Olympic long jumpers, and you see the triple jumpers, the high jumpers, and you see the Olympic ski jumpers, snow jumpers as well do it. They close their eyes and they visualize the most successful jump they can do. And when you do that, you actually jump better 45% of the time. So when we think about business planning, if we can get some of the key things together in a business plan and we can visualize what success might look like, that's what a business plan should do. Funnily enough, I was taught this technique. I was actually a top 10 Australian triple jumper many years ago when I was about 18. And I was taught this technique when I was 12. And certainly my first jump in every competition that I did seemed to be my best, because I'd been thinking about it for days on end, about what the perfect jump might be. So that's something you need to do. Mark Bouris, a well-known Australian business leader, I was at a presentation he did in August last year. And he talks about, when you've got an organization, even if it's just yourself, you've got to be a bit of a beacon of hope for yourself and your team. And again, if you've got a good plan and you can articulate and visualize that plan to yourself or your team, then you've got a lot bigger chance of succeeding. One of the techniques that I use in my workshops that is very easy for you to do afterwards. So throughout this, there's a few little tips of how you might help build your own plan here. One of the exercises I use is to imagine that it's 3 years' time and it's the end of the year and you're having a big party to celebrate the success of your business. And, you might be on a boat on Sydney Harbour and you're popping champagne off the back of the boat. It's been the most successful, business you could ever have imagined. Just write down what might have happened to lead to that success. It's a really easy visualization technique. If it's end of the year 2025, you're on the back of a boat, you've got some of your friends there, some of your team there. It's a big success. What's happened? What would have happened? And it's a really easy exercise to do, just to go off the top of my head, I would have done this. I would have won 3 big clients. I would have opened a second store. I would have, whatever it might be. It's just a really easy exercise for you to do. So it's just as we kick off, that's one thing I'd just get you to think ahead, not think a month ahead or 2 months ahead, because that's what happens when we're all setting up businesses and we're being entrepreneurs. Try and think 3 years ahead and what success might look like and why and how might you have gotten there. The other thing is you've got to articulate it really, really easily. And if you can literally story tell your strategy, then you've got a really high chance of success. The WeWork team talk about using clear, concise language and avoiding jargon. So don't try and get, in my mind, don't try and get too business speak or business jargon, because people just glaze over a bit. Try and think that, if you're at a dinner party or in Australia, you might be at a barbecue and you're talking to someone about your business. How do you explain it really, really simply as to what the strategy is behind that business? Similarly, there's been a lot written. Jeff Bezos at Amazon, $1.3 trillion company, I think the last time I looked, he does not accept a paper, a research paper, a memo, a business case, a business plan longer than 6 pages. So he's built a $1 trillion company on 6-page documents. So, again, if we can get a plan written down in simple form that might be 6, 10, 14 pages only, then you've got a much better chance of success. And this was a great quote that someone that had dealt with Jeff Bezos's company for many years. It was in an article about a year ago, a guy called Jim Fowler. I'm lucky enough to have seen the professor at Harvard, Boris Groysberg, written down the bottom there. He's been voted the #1 professor at Harvard, and he talks about there being 4 not negotiables when you've got to develop a plan for growing your business. You've got to have a great strategy. We'll talk a bit about that in a minute. You've got to execute that strategy with excellence. No point having a great strategy and executing it badly. No point having a poor plan and executing it really well. And they also talk a lot about having the right culture, even if it's just yourself to start with. You know the sort of things that you value. So what's the culture that you want to develop? If you grow the business and in a year's time you might have 5 people working for you, and a few years down the track you might have 15. What's the culture you want? And then obviously as you grow, you've got to have the right structure. You can Google a lot about this. It's called, slightly boringly, the Harvard Business School 4+2 rule for growth. There's a lot of information you can find around that. And effectively what Boris Groysberg and 2 of his colleagues have done, and all they have studied for 25 years, is what are the drivers of growth in business. And those 4, they say, are not negotiable: strategy, execution, culture, and structure. And then they say that you need to pick 2 of the next 4. You've got to be a talent, like a team-driven organization, or a leader. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, where you're very much the front person of your organization. There's no right or wrong, but you should really choose. And then to grow a business, you've got to be quite innovative. You've got to come up with new things, or you partner with other people that can drive that innovation. So there's a bit of choice to be made of those next 2 of those next 4 drivers. And then there's another 21 drivers of growth that they've uncovered. But a lot of that depends on what type of business that you're in. So I want to touch on the strategy part first, because It's the biggest thing you've got to get right. And I'm just going to give you a few little tips and tricks about how you might visualize or articulate your strategy. So strategy should be about a 3 to 5 year horizon. It's about thinking forward. What's my strategy for the company to get me to a place? As we said, visualized off the boat on Sydney Harbour, what's success look like in 3 to 5 years' time? The first thing, and you may have touched on this in some of the other sessions, there's no point writing the strategy unless you know the environment that you are operating in. What's the market context? What is that environment? What are the industry trends? If you're opening a retail store, what are the trends overall in retail spend, in consumer confidence, in business confidence, so some of those high level things, what are the things you can tap into that might be an advantage for you, and what are the things that you got to be watched out? What are the tailwinds and the headwinds? Then you really need to understand your customers. And as Kumar said, my background originally was always in big advertising agency groups and marketing. And the first thing you always wanted to do in marketing is to figure out who's your customer or your future customer and what do they need? And therefore, what product and service are you selling to them? So just write down in some dot points, what does your customer look like? And not the customer you might have now, but think about the types of customers you want in 3 years' time. And what do they need from you? And how can you fulfill that need? Then it's important to understand what I call the DNA of the organization. Why did you start a business? What was the history and the story behind it? Because often in that is some really interesting things that you need to take into your strategy going forward. And sometimes there's parts of what you thought was important when you started the business that you want to leave behind. So that's really what the DNA piece is. You do need to look at your competitors. And then finally, you need to look at why you are different. And you need to be genuine about that points of differentiation. There's no point saying, oh, we're different because of this, and this. If you're not really different in those areas, then you can't really hang your hat on that. So I like to try and summarize, 5 or 6 dot points under each of these headings. Get that onto one page so that if anyone ever asks you, you can say, oh, well, the environment and the industry trends are this, and this. Our core 2 types of customers are, this type of customer and that type of customer. What they're going to need from us in the next 3 years is this, and this. And, the history of our organization and the core DNA of it is this. Our competitors are these types of people, but why we're different is X, Y, Z. So you should be able to use this to really simply tell anybody what the context of the market is. Sometimes we get really detailed in this. You can still write a lot of detail in the background, but I like having it written as a summary as well. You might have 5 pages on industry trends and a couple of pages on customers and their needs and a page on your story. But what you want to do is have a succinct, very visual, not too many dot point summation of the world that your business is going to operate in. Then you need to ask yourself, can you deliver an elevator pitch of your strategy based on that market context? So can I say, here's what our company is going to do going forward. Here's what my business is going to do. And it taps into all of those things. And you need to ask yourself some questions. Why are you in business? What is it that made you start this? What do you do, that others don't? And how do you do it? How do you best showcase what you do? You need to really cleverly articulate your vision for the business. And the vision should be something that, really makes you want to be the best or the top 10 or the best place to work or the fastest growing or something that's measurable. Your vision should always be quite measurable. Then you, as I said before, you need to really think about the culture of your organization. And I'm going to talk a bit about that in a minute. And then you've got to think about what's your growth plan. You might want to say, I'm starting now and I want to have 15 people by year 3, or I want to get to $1 million of turnover or $10 million or $100 million or whatever it might be. So what are the stepping stones? So if that's your end target in 3 to 5 years, what are the stepping stones to get there? And do you know the specific things you might need to do as part of that growth plan? So these are just a couple of questions that you should be asking yourselves. Top line. Now, let me show you a bit more about how you can tie all that together. Because as I said before, you want to be able to visualize that, and you want to be able to tell it as a bit of a story. Obviously, with my background in marketing and advertising, I spent a lot of my career doing brand storytelling. How do you tell the story of a brand so that a potential customer, whether it's a consumer, a business, or whoever the end customer might be, how can we tell that brand story that's engaging and interesting, and people want to buy that product? And I often talk about the history of branding, and many people, it seems so obvious when you see a picture like this, but branding actually was invented 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Now, we didn't quite have numerals like this back then. We might have had hieroglyphics, or we might have had Roman numerals, or we might have had other language. But branding was to identify, what type of animal, whose animal that was, so which farm it came from, and usually what breed it was. And it was a very simple thing that farmers did, so that when they went to the market and sold their animal, not only could they say, hang on, that's not your goat, that's my goat, because there's my brand on it, but it also highlighted the breed of goat that it might have been. So in its simplest form, it talked about what breed of animal and which farm it came from. Then what might have happened over time is that all of a sudden some of the other farmers realized that a certain farmer was getting paid a lot more money at the markets for their animals. They looked a bit shinier, they looked a bit more plump, and the other farmers would say to this farmer, how come people are paying more for your goats than my goats? And the farmer might have said, well, actually, I take them down to the stream on my farm every afternoon, and I let them eat some long grass and have a drink of water. And it seems to fatten them up a bit, and it seems to make their coats a bit shiny, and they seem to get a bit of exercise going down and back. And now it seems to be, people are noticing that at the market, and they're happy to pay more for it. And then what happens is, because that farmer might be quite competitive, they then turn their purpose into breeding the best possible animal and actually, creating the best possible animal they can, because they want to maintain that 10% better price. And that's where branding comes from. Now, some of you might have seen over the years on YouTube, one of the great TED Talks is by a guy called Simon Sinek. And he talks about purpose, brand purpose marketing. And he actually says the way that I just said it is actually a bit boring from a storytelling point of view. The more interesting way to tell that story is to start with the why. The farmer is hell-bent every day. He gets out of bed, or she gets out of bed every day to produce the best possible animal they can. How they do it is take it down to the stream and let it have have a drink and eat some long grass. But at the end of the day, they're a goat farmer. And what we tend to do when someone says, oh, what's your business all about? We tend to just do a description of what it is. And I learned from my old days in the advertising industry that I would say, well, this company is a creative advertising agency. And I think in Australia, there's over 8,000 registered advertising agencies. So therefore, there was 8,000 other people saying exactly the same as me. So you need to find a different way and a more interesting way of telling your story. Rather than starting with the what, which is the previous slide, you need to start with the why. And you need to tell that more interesting story of, why do you exist? What's the purpose of the business? Then here's some good examples of how we do that. Here's how we highlight it. Here's a couple of case studies. Here's how we showcase it. And then you talk about the what. And the example I like to use is Apple. Apple don't say to us that they're a computer company or a mobile phone company or a music and video catalog company. They start with the top. They get out of bed every day to empower people with breakthrough services and devices that people haven't thought of before. How they do it is to create products that are really easy to use, like this Mac that I'm on, that are beautifully designed, like many of you have got the iPhone probably in front of you. And then they might quietly say, well, yeah, at the end of the day, we're a computer company, a mobile phone company, and a music and video catalog company. So try and get your story of your company into that format. What's your why? Why do you exist? Then give us an example of the best way of how you do that, and then talk about the what. You might be a retail, you might work in, you might have a beauty shop, or you might have a whatever it might be. So, try and do that last. Try and get into the habit of telling your story of your strategy a bit more higher. Now, interestingly, I've done a lot of work all around the world, and whilst that's a great way, the why, how, what of telling a story, we naturally do another thing when we tell a story. And the thing that we do is, and I can very quickly, if any of you are up for it, often we have a story about either our first car or our first part-time job, and there's normally a story behind it. Now, I'm not sure if I've got any volunteers or not, so I'll very quickly jump out and see if I've got a volunteer of anybody that wants to tell us all a story about their first car or their first part-time job. And then I'll explain the added extras we need to build into our storytelling of our strategy. Anyone, or are you all going to be a bit quiet? All right. Let me show you what we naturally do. Back to my presentation. What we normally do when we tell a story is we normally put what I call a soundbite up front. If it was about the car, when we've run this for a lot of people, they would go, my first car was a sky blue Mazda. And what you remember about that story is sky blue. Or they might say, my first job was as a, in Australia, we'd say checkout person or whatever at a supermarket. And so you remember a little soundbite. And when we're at a dinner party or when we're at a gathering, we're telling stories naturally, we tend to lead with a little bit of a quick soundbite up front. So when we're telling the story about our strategy, we also want to be able to do that. The other thing we tend to do with storytelling is have a payoff line. We tend to have a way that we finish. So, we tell a long story, and if it's a joke, for example, there's always the funny line at the end of the joke. So we need to think about that in our natural storytelling way when we're storytelling our strategy, about having a soundbite up front, then doing our why, how, what, and then having a bit of a payoff line that people will remember. Now here's an example. There's my first car. Now I'm getting a bit old now, but that was a car that was almost as old as me at the time. An Austin 1800. I bought it in a country town up in central Victoria. And you'll notice that cars back then had no side mirrors and no headrests, and there was a whole lot of things that didn't happen. That's actually me standing up the back in the jumper that my grandmother knitted. And I've got so many stories I could tell about that car, including one night when I was trying to have a sleep in the car at a country ball, a friend's 21st on a big farm, and as I was starting to fall asleep, my friends tried to put a sheep in the car with me, which was not ideal at the time. But what you'd remember tomorrow about that story is that someone tried to put a sheep in my car. So we always have a little payoff about a story at the end. So when we're talking about storytelling our strategy of our company, have that little soundbite or conflict or bit of intrigue up front, and then build to a bit of a crescendo toward the end. So if I come back to the framework, one of the things you should try and do is, if you could explain your business in 2 words, and those 2 words are different and interesting, and I use charity and philanthropy as an example. One of the charities that I used to be on the board of, they would say that they were the Inspiring Philanthropy Organisation. So they did inspiring philanthropy, but they also inspired others to do philanthropy or charity work. So if you can get this right, I mean, there's a advertising agency we did this for about 2 years ago, before we actually formally launched the company, and they would say that they're the relentless growth agency, and they get out of bed every day to drive unfair market share for their clients. And if you don't believe that they can drive unfair market share, well, they've got a client, McDonald Jones Homes, which is one of the biggest builders in the country now. But back then, it was a small rural builder. So they took them from being a small rural builder to the 3rd biggest building company in Australia. And they would say, well, that's unfair market share. And then they'd say, at the end of the day, what do? They do creative advertising. They do media, they do thought leadership, and the vision of their business was to be, one of the most respected independent agencies in the country. And that's the piece at the end. You want to have both an emotional and a rational vision for your company if you can, the aim of the business. As I said before, you want to be the most respected or the biggest or the fastest growing or the best place to work, something that's measurable. And then you should put a financial target. I want to be a company turning over $500,000, or I want to be a company turning over $50 million. Whatever your vision, depending on where your business is at, you should really have both an emotional vision and also a very strong financial target. Again, all of this is over 3 years. So even with me just explaining that advertising agency company, you very quickly get a feel. The relentless growth agency, they get out of bed every day to drive unfair market share for their clients. One of the builders, they went from being a small builder to a massive one. What they do at the end of the day is do creative ideas with grit, hardworking ideas. They do media science, and their aim was to be the most respected business doing a certain amount of money by 2025. So because it's written in boxes like that, and you can't fit too many words in those boxes, you can very easily, as I went back to the start, I can close my eyes and I can remember what's in those boxes, and I can story tell very quickly an overarching strategy. And when we get to doing pitches of our business, and we've got 90 seconds or 3 minutes to do it, having a framework like this really helps you very succinctly say what your business is all about. Again, if I go back to Apple, I've just taken this from a whole lot of information that's available about Apple, but they would say that they're the Think Differently company. They get out of bed every day to empower people with breakthrough services and devices. As I said, how do they do that is through beautifully designed products that are really easy to use. What are they? A computer company, a mobile phone company, a music and video catalog company. And I did find a vision that they wrote a couple of years ago, and that was to make the best products on earth and leave the world better than we found it, and have a valuation of over $1 trillion by 2018. Well, they're now over $2 trillion in 2022. So, you can just see how really easy and simply it is to articulate a strategy, in a pitch in a 90-second scenario. So that's a bit of a framework that you should be trying to get whatever your business is, small, medium, large, into some sort of framework like this. The other one is, and we often hear the phrase clickbait in media, and this is my only clickbait headline in my whole presentation. But there are only 5 ways to grow a company, and that's something well worth remembering. The first way to grow your company is to continue doing what you're doing and just selling more of it, whether it's a service or a product or whatever it might be. So you might have 2 or 3 ways that you currently make money in your organization, and you need to visualize, well, in 3 years' time, if I keep doing what I'm doing, how far do you think that might get? Then you can open in, if you're opening in Western Sydney now, you might decide to open in the eastern suburbs or Melbourne or Brisbane or Adelaide. So you can open in new markets. Then you might launch new products or services. You might open new capabilities, new services. You could buy another smaller firm that's similar to yours. You could take that over and grow your company by merging with somebody else or buying someone else. And the final one is that the one that's most forgotten is, who can you partner with where you can both make money? Because often there might be another company that's not a competitor, but you've got a similar target audience, you've got a similar database, and you can both work together to both make money. And that's the 5th way, strategic partners. So business as usual, open in new markets or new cities or new countries, launch new products or services, buy something or merge with someone else or form some strategic partnerships. So again, what I'd like to say to you is, just think about 3 years ahead. What does the business as usual look like? Could you open in other markets? Could you launch some other things, other products, other services? And just write little numbers down in each of those. You might think you could grow something by $500,000 or something by, $1 million. Just again, visualize what that looks like. And then all of a sudden you'll have a target that you might say, oh, wow, I'm currently, a small business that's just started doing $100,000, but I want to get to $1 million, and here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to jump from strategy. I haven't forgotten about execution. I'm going to come back to execution, but I want to quickly talk about culture before I move on to execution. Culture is often misunderstood, and it's how you live your vision and the vision of your business and the value and what you value in the business in your people. And again, when you're first starting out a company, it might just be you, but you've still got your own values. So again, if I take Apple, their vision from that previous chart to make the best products on earth and leave the world better than we found it, valued at $1 trillion by 2018. What they value in their team is people who drive simplicity, people with humanity, and people with creativity. They're their values. They're the values of the company down the bottom. And culture is made up of three things when you live out your values and your vision. One is the behaviors that you accept. We've all probably worked for people in the past where, they've done things that you just go, that's not an appropriate behavior here. Or those people really embody the perfect behaviors in our organization. That's the easy one. People forget that systems and processes can really upend your culture. So, for example, if we pick creativity for Apple, if they had systems that were really stringent and cumbersome and hard to work through, it's then very hard to be creative. So people would say, that's not great. Or if we valued simplicity, but our systems and processes were really hard to work through and they weren't very simple, then all of a sudden people, even if it's your second or third or fourth employee, would be saying, well, this isn't really the right culture. The values, they're incongruous. They don't quite work together. Similarly with symbolism, it might be, often a value might be something like we value team players. But if all of a sudden all the leadership team sit in, or you as the owner sit in a fancy office and your four other workers, are sitting out sharing a desk, that doesn't say team. That when you look into that building and that office you might have, it actually doesn't symbolize things. So we can often get culture wrong because of some of these challenges. So you need to think through what behaviors will we accept and not accept? What systems and processes do we need to put in place that support our values and our vision? And, what's the right symbols? What are the right symbolisms that should be there that also support our vision and our values? Back to execution, and I've probably got about 10 or 15 minutes to go of chatting, and then we can open it up for a few questions. But if we've done the strategy and we've done the culture, as I said earlier, you can have a great strategy and the right culture, but if you don't execute well, your whole plan won't be able to come to fruition. Execution should be about the shorter term. The strategy is about 3, 4, 5 years, whatever you decide. Execution is what are you going to do in the first 12 months of that 3 or 4 or 5 year plan to get yourself on the right journey. There's actually 8 pillars of executional excellence that you need to think about within your organization. And I've put them in alphabetical order, in English alphabetical order, so you can remember them. Marketing, new business or business development, pipeline, operations. So again, that's where the systems and processes and all of the operational things of the company come in. The product itself, you would always start thinking about the product first. Have I got the right product? Is it good enough? Do I need to improve it? Do I need to add new products or services? The R is your customer or your client relationships, depending on obviously if you sell direct to consumers and people, or you sell maybe to another business. I talked a lot about strategic partners just about 5 minutes ago. Who are they? Who's the critical partners to your business? Then talent is the people, culture, people development, training, all of those things that go in people and culture. And interestingly, if you do the first 7 really well, the last one, the financials, look after themselves. So often when I ran businesses, and I was lucky enough to have, run companies where I think one of them had 12 companies reporting through to me and one had 17. And a new general manager might start and they would say, I'm going to turn the whole company around on people and culture, the talent pillar. And I would say that's one of the 7 things you're going to do. Or they'd say, I'm going to turn the whole organization round on pipeline and business development and new business. And I'd say that's one of the 7 things you're going to do. You've got to get all 7 right. You might have worked for an organization where things haven't gone so well. And it's usually the excuses in one of these bubbles. Well, our product wasn't as good as our competitor, and so the competitor started winning. Or the competitor started marketing far better than us. Or 2 of our best people left last year. Or one of our biggest clients left. Or we had a big pitch or a tender for a big piece of business, we didn't win it. So the excuses in those bubbles. And what I suggest you do is do a little exercise of a brainstorm to say, well, if this is my business, how is my marketing going? Give yourself a mark out of 10. Is it a 5 out of 10, a 1 out of 10, a 7 out of 10, a 10 out of 10? And then write down why you think it's a 7. And then you sort of send yourself a bit of a goal for next year. Well, we want to go from a 7 to an 8. And so jot those things down. The other one is to do a similar exercise to say, well, what's good about my people and culture plan, my talent? Where are my gaps? What should I start doing in the next 12 months? What should I stop doing? What should I continue doing? And if you do those exercises and do a bit of a brainstorm and write all that down, then you should be able to figure out what are some goals for people. It might be that, I want to hire 3 new key people in the next 12 months. Or it could be, back to marketing, that I want to drive 100 really strong qualified leads. Or in new business, it might be that I want to, win 2 major clients, or whatever it might be. So use that brainstorming, the good gap, start, stop, continue, the marking yourself and writing down a lot of reasons as to why you might only feel like you're currently at a 5 out of 10 and what you might need to do going forward to get to a 7, and then turn those into goals and tactics. And when we run these sorts of workshops with our clients, and we actually work through these and spend probably 45 minutes to an hour on each one, we might end up with 4 or 5 or 6 goals under each pillar. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, I've now got 35 things that I need to do. Like that's, all of a sudden I'm a bit overwhelmed. And what we say then is do a bit of an exercise and try and prioritize them down. Try and get out of all of those goals you just uncovered and you think that are important, what are the 10 most important? What are the 10 that you really have to do? If you're going to have a really successful year on your journey to achieving your 3-year strategy, what are the top 10 things that you have to do? And then write yourself a bit of a plan. What is that goal? What are some tactics? If it's yourself and maybe a business partner, who of you is going to take charge of that one? And then write a bit of what needs to happen in the next 4 to 6 weeks. What are the actions to get this project underway to achieve this goal? So it's really trying to chunk things down into really easily understandable pieces. So, because if you can have your market context, go back 20, 25 minutes ago, if you can have your market context on a page, if you can have that summary of your strategy and your culture and your values on one page, if you can have your growth plan on one page, if you can have the top 10 things you need to do in the first year on a page, and you can have 10 one-page action plans, all of a sudden you're at 14 pages of a simple structure of a business plan, that you can readily go back to and refer to over time. The last one, and obviously when you're starting businesses up, structure is not as important, but as you grow, having the right team and the right roles and responsibilities is important. The only thing I'll say about structure is that it should follow your strategy. Often we will try and create a structure around the people we've already got rather than figuring out what's the right structure that we need for the strategy we're trying to deliver on. So in summary around that piece, a couple of key takeouts. One, on the left, get the right strategy, execute it really well. Make sure even from day one that you've got the right culture and you've got that written down and you understand the sort of culture and the values and the behaviors and the symbols and the systems and processes that you need. And then think about, if I do grow to 15 people by the 3rd year, what's the structure that I might need at that point in time? Because then you can work backwards to go, what sort of people should I hire along the way? And then, as I said, key two things from the start: visualize what success looks like. Close your eyes. Imagine what the right strategy is. Get it down onto simple pages. Storytell it. Use that framework of brand storytelling, the 2 words, the why, the good examples, the what you do, and the vision. As I said earlier, less is more. A lot of templates tell you should be writing 50-page business plans that you never go and look at again because it's just overwhelming and you can't tell what it is. Make them practical and accountable. Get those goals and tactics and action plans done, and then use it to align and focus either yourself or your team, depending on what size and what journey you're on within your organization. So that's some top line in 35 odd minutes or 40 minutes. That's a real big top line of some of the things that I try and encourage, even some big $500 million clients, as well as startups that we work with. They're some of the core elements that I'd encourage you to think about when you're building out your business and your business strategy, and some of these will also help with the pitch. Particularly some of those frameworks around the storytelling of the strategy. So I feel like I've just been the university professor for 40 minutes, but I'm very open to answering anybody's questions or hearing any comments.
We could start with Andrew. Andrew, you can hear me, right? So
yeah. Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah. Happy to listen to listen to you. It was really interesting, and I take many things. I never know that like 5 businesses and only one has a business plan. So like for me today, it's interesting information. Yeah. Question to you. I don't really know what to ask you because like all the information is great. I make today many things new from you. That's why, Andrew, thank you that you make so good presentation for us and give us many new information. Yeah, just that.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Yeah. It was really nice. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Anyone else? I mean, look, I'm certainly open afterwards for people to email me through Kumar. I think I do need to open my Opportunities Australia email address, but I'm happy to answer any questions if people have got them separately. I can send Kumar some. I'm happy to send a couple of my templates through of blank templates of slides that people might want to use or utilize in anything that they might be pulling together. Obviously, we just recorded it if people need to go back over and watch some things again.